Hi, I'm Jeannine Vegh, and I'm a psychotherapist in the Columbus, Ohio area. And with me today,
Hi, I'm Ellen Seigel, also a psychotherapist, social worker, life coach. And I think it's good to say that if anybody wants to read anything that we've written, right? We've written some things, right?
right?
I mean, your book can be gotten on Amazon, is that correct?
Yes, but my books are more fiction and historical fiction.
Oh, yes, but they are inspiring and have lots of stimulation for personal growth in them.
Well, thank
So,
you.
so I would recommend that. And would you say the names of what those are?
Well, I have a book called The Uprisers, which is a Hungarian historical fiction. I have a book called Little Girls Should Ride Ponies. That's a fictional family saga. And well, those are the only two
Okay.
I want to talk about. But I also have a website, discerninggal.com, which is listed underneath this YouTube video. And it has 3 sections: Ohio women's history, the arts, and psychology.
That's great. And so I have Be Happy No Matter What, 5 Steps to Inner Freedom, which is a soft reconciling with your childhood, whatever your childhood has been. And then there's a little pocket book called Handling Your Own Emotions. So if you get stuck somewhere, you can run to the restroom, whip this little book out, and give you choices about how to handle what you're going through. And also the website is BeHappyNoMatterWhat.com, where you can get some free contemplative thoughts daily to your email address. So we want to welcome you today to Enlightening Conversations. And our topic today is
Critical thinking.
okay.
So to get started with that, Ellen is going to tell us a little kind of definition. What does it mean to have critical thought?
Well, I looked it up, and actually the definitions are a little dry for me. You know, it's sorting thoughts out, using reasoning and conscious deliberation to come to some conclusions, to sort out information about any content, intent, whatever it is you're focused on. So that's a pretty general way to look at it. And the other things I was thinking about were the idea of the words critical and thinking. We're all familiar with thinking, and many of us have feelings about the term critical. And so I would say for today, to suspend any, I don't know, negative connotations that we have about critical, because it's often associated with demeaning, degrading, putting down, negativity. And today we're pairing it up with thinking in terms of discernment and sort of analyzing what it is each one of us would apply critical thinking to. So I don't know, anything to add to that, at least at this time?
Well, I was just going to read a quote because as you can see on my panel here behind me, I have 4 amazing gentlemen in our history. The top left is Dr. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz. The bottom part underneath him is J. Krishnamurti, a renowned philosopher. And then on the right, you have Albert Einstein, which probably everybody has figured that out by now. And then the bottom right is Sadhguru. So the quote I wanted to start with comes from J. Krishnamurti. And he says, "So when you are listening to somebody completely, attentively, then you are listening not only to the words, but also to the feeling of what is being conveyed. to the whole of it, not part of it. So that's how I wanted to give my definition.
Wow. That is, that actually takes critical thinking to the depth and intensity I was hoping we would go to. So thank you. I mean, intuitively, we just know.
Yeah, we do. And it goes into the higher consciousness. It's taking people out of their ego and into a much more broader, deeper, higher way of thinking about things.
Can you read it one more time?
Sure. Let me get those glasses back on. So when you are listening to somebody completely, attentively, then you are listening not only to the words, but also to the feeling of what is being conveyed, to the whole of it, not part of it.
So what that says to me, with the feeling and the whole of it, not part of it. There's so much in that. That whatever we're looking at has so much more to it than what it appears to look like on the outside. So taking his invitation, I like to think of that as deep listening, with complete attentiveness. So there's the words, there's the feelings that are coming through, and then there's the idea of that you can take the whole of it in, not just the part. So that's that adds a lot to how we can witness and experience and then participate in what's in front of us, we might choose to look at something. Well, actually, I'm thinking that we do some kind of thinking and feeling about anything that we see, even if it's out of our awareness.
Yes.
You know, so this adds consciousness to that, which amplifies its meaning and our ability to interact with what's in front of us.
Yeah.
So, okay, so how, just for some people who are watching, so how does that relate to the topic of critical thinking?
Yeah. Well, so for me, it relates to the topic of critical thinking by having us dissect what is in front of us. It's having us, it's sort of drawing our thoughts, drawing our minds into mindfully looking at what is this person saying in front of us and what does that mean? Having that self-awareness to go outside of the box, to be able to step away from our ego and just hear what the hear what the person is saying by looking at it from a broader context, but also by, I think, asking questions of the person to clarify. So do you mean this is what you're saying? And then they can have a chance to say, well, no, that's not what I meant. I meant this. Or asking them, where do you base your opinion from? Like, where did you draw this conclusion from? What resources did you gather this from? That sort of thing. Instead of just taking what they say and making a decision in your head, oh, they're an idiot, or
no, it's true.
Or
I mean, we see a lot of that in our world today.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that comes from people feeling fear and insecurity and things like that. And you know, you get that knee-jerk reaction, which is it's good to try to calm ourselves down to be able to ask questions,
Right.
because there is more. And once we hear what more there is, then it allows us to
Well,
have,
see
go
what
ahead.
we have in common with each other. What strengths do we have in common with each other? And is there a way that we can come to a compromise in our thinking process?
Right. The other thing is, you mentioned mindfully looking at things, and I'll say these days more than in the past, mindfulness and that concept, which I believe includes, you know, a thoughtful evaluation, a thoughtful experience, rather than jumping to a conclusion. I had a teacher who schooled me on something you said earlier about appearance, what something appears to look like, and it triggers a reaction in me, and taught me to slow things down and, like this, listen for what more there is. Because things can be cut short really quickly, and then there's nowhere to go with it, and that each one of us has much more to us than just words coming out of our mouths.
Mm-hmm.
And asking questions. One of the things that I'm just thinking, what else about critical thinking as a tool? And that we were talking about this before we came on to the camera, about that this can be applied, asking questions of the other person can be applied in any areas of our lives. You have a healthcare situation, and you get 3 opinions, and one opinion is have surgery, another opinion is use this medicine, and another opinion is to wait and see.
Or holistic thought.
Or and other holistic and a variety of different holistic avenues. And that the critical thinking is that you're worthwhile enough to ask questions, and if you can't conjure up questions, ask people that you know. Here's my situation, what questions are good for me to ask about this?
And also, something that I was just now thinking is that having respect enough for your body, your mind, your spirit, to make that decision from your gut feeling. Because if you have a health situation, you've got to do what feels right for your body. You know,
Right.
listening to one person says surgery, and I've had this happen before. I went to a top surgeon. He's like the top surgeon in the United States at Stanford for a particular situation, which I won't mention. And I got his opinion: have surgery. Here's the situation. But it was going to be a debilitating situation. I was going to have somebody come and take care of me for a couple of weeks. And as a single woman, it was like, yeah, that's not going to work. But it also had a lot of downsides to it. Like, it might not work, or it could be even worse. So I didn't want to take that chance. And so I was respecting my body and listening to my gut, and I ended up doing other holistic options instead. And actually the situation is not an issue anymore as it was.
Interesting. So you're bringing up a very important point. So gathering information. So presumably that goes through your brain. You know, you gather information, you raise questions, and intuition actually, in my mind, is part of critical thinking, because that's where you're going to decipher the best outcome for yourself. And you know, and plenty of us don't know what to do and are easily overwhelmed by all the options. and then to be able to get to your gut feeling, which doesn't really go through your brain at all. So you can weigh alternatives and then sit with it and see what the bottom line is for you.
Yeah. So let's jump into why people don't use critical thought, and what happens when you don't have critical thinking. What consequences?
Well, I just want to share this, that when our son was very young and I was a young parent, one of the things in the school district, when we as parents were learning from the staff and we're working together to support the kids, they were learning critical thinking skills.
Ooh.
And that was an actual title of a unit in one of their classes. And maybe that was all through elementary school too. Now, I don't remember what the curriculum was, but there was schooling on how to think about what's in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to say many of us didn't have that.
Yeah.
If you happen to have had parents or caregivers when you were growing up, who had that, I think my father was a good critical thinker. So I witnessed things. So, kids learn what they live or things like that. Or when he was handling my unruly behavior or things like that, and the way that he handled it or how he was explaining it to me, maybe I got some tips from that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people take a course in logic in high school, or maybe if they're fortunate enough to go to college. Sometimes you work in a store and you're an employee and you notice how things are organized, or and then some kids ask lots of questions and
Mm-hmm.
some kids ask no questions,
Yeah.
for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
So, okay. So what are the features? First, I want to go to your question, but what are the features first? How could you tell if there's no critical thinking going on, or limited critical thinking? Lots of times we can't tell from the outside of something what's going on the inside, but there might be some little red flags.
Yeah.
So, I would like to look at that first.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I can easily speak to that. Growing up in a household where there wasn't critical thinking,
Wow.
I sort of figured that out on my own. I did take a class in high school and then I took some classes in college. But what I remember hearing when I was growing up is things like, well, Walter Cronkite said, so it must be true. And I'm not putting a dig on Walter Cronkite. I think he was a wonderful person. It's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that it was just kind of like, he's the authority on the subject, so it must be true. Same thing with, I heard a lot growing up, well, the doctor said, so I must have this, or this must be true. And they would never go outside of themselves to get a second opinion or research things. Back then it would be the encyclopedia or what have you. But so it was just always, or the newspaper said, or the journalist said, it was always whatever they said, it must be true. And that was the bottom line. It was concrete, no expanding of the consciousness, no going anywhere else for details. They made a decision that that person was the only authority on the subject and nobody else.
And many parents, certainly in my parents' day, and maybe yours, wouldn't think to say to a child, and this is why I agree with Walter Cronkite.
Yeah.
Sorry, Walter. And this is what I heard him say, and these are the 3 points that I value, and da 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 da.
Yeah.
So, and in my household, it might have been, listen, I'm your parent, do it because I'm telling, I would say, why?
Yeah.
Well, because I told you so.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And even though I'll never forget, there was one situation, we were sitting around the kitchen table. I must have been a young teenager. And my father said, Ellen, there's something you don't know. This is not a democracy in our house.
What I say goes.
Yeah, and he did it in a really nice way. But I certainly got the message.
Right.
I didn't have a vote.
Yeah.
So, and when it came, go ahead.
Until you pay the bills, you don't get to have a say.
Well, that's another one. When I remember, when you grow up and you have your own house, you're going to see why I came to these decisions. Only you're going to come to them in your way.
Exactly.
So, I think that that was great. That was great. So here's two people, me, Jeannine, multiply that by, I don't know how many billions of people there are in the world. We all have our own twists on what we've been exposed to. I love hearing, what you said, and, I figured it out.
Yes, me too.
So I wonder, I like this idea. I don't know if it's true that all human beings have that ability.
Yes.
To do that if they can find little doorways. I really believe that as kids, we are paying close attention to everything that's going on. And if we're fortunate enough to get free of the impact of those around us who we've felt the impression of, well, I don't know, what would you call the absence of critical thinking? And there's a million other things, I don't know, but
Denial.
there's denial, ignorance,
yeah. Concrete thinking.
Yeah, not aware of,
Anger.
Having
anger issues.
Yeah, any emotional issues that come up when we have
trap the person with stuck points.
Yeah, when we have emotional issues that come up that overwhelm us and we can't think straight during them, then we're blocked from, whatever critical thinking we could apply or the development of that. There was something else about that. Later on, many of us wake up and many of us are embroiled in trauma way into our lives and don't have the headspace, consciousness space. We're, in survival mode still.
Yeah. So I wanted to kind of go a little to an example of a situation. Something a little bit more juicier. So, and it's in the past, so we won't be dealing with current situations, of course. But when I look at Dr. Viktor Frankl and I think about the Holocaust and how that was about not having critical thinking skills, but I'm not even talking about the level of Nazism. That's not what I'm talking
about. Where was there not critical thinking skills?
All over the place. But what I wanted to go to was looking at it from an individual perspective. So I love talking about a French Village, which is a French TV series. And I learned so much about history, World War II, from looking at that TV series. And it was looking at a small village that was occupied by the Germans during World War II. And in the, I think 7 seasons, I think it was, each season dealt with a different aspect of the war each season was literally a different year. in the war. And you would see, it was very interesting to see how these people were just listening. They were creating their beliefs based on things that they were hearing. Maybe somebody heard something on the radio, or maybe somebody heard something from a neighbor, or even more to the point, there was a point in the film where the mayor was talking to, the mayor of the little village was talking to another government person. I forgot his title, but he was saying to the guy, well, I think it was President Paten. Is that correct? I think that was maybe I have that wrong, but the president was saying, he had heard from the president that the Jewish people that they were rounding up in their little village was going to Paris. And so he was saying to the other government person was saying, well, what are they going to do with them when they get to Paris? And he says, well, I suppose they're going to put them in apartments. It's just a way to get them out of our village, because we have enough to deal with here as it is, with the Germans taking over our village. So I thought that was a very interesting piece in the video, in the TV series, because it was showing you how people were just taking for granted that if the president said it, it must be true. And then you could see where, when he was saying putting them in apartments, you could see that he was just sort of making that up, because he didn't say, well, the president said they would put them in apartments, they're just taking them to Paris. He himself made up the part about the apartments. Then the other government guy was believing him because he's the mayor, and saying, oh, okay, and assuming that that probably came from the president. That's where his thoughts came from. So it's like, you see how this whole this village mentality is being created, because he goes on to tell it to other people in the village, and that becomes the rumor that Jewish people are being taken to apartments in Paris, and they're just moving them out of the village that they were in. So I think that's a wonderful example of how innocent and naive people were in that time period, in a horrible catastrophe that took place for many years and annihilated entire peoples. But it was based on people believing things that they were being told and making their own decisions.
So how would that have been different with critical thinking applied?
Wow. Well, it was different because there were people who had critical thinking skills. We may not have agreed, looking back, we may not have agreed with how they went about it, but you had the French Resistance. They had their own critical thinking skills, right?
Right.
You had the communists. They had their own ideas about how things should be handled. So you did have those different networks of people that were doing their own things. Even people who were on the black market, they were thinking about how to sustain their financial situation by selling things that people couldn't get, and taking the matters into their own hands. So those were different types of ways people had critical thinking. And certainly there were individuals who said to themselves, well, I'm going to save my neighbor, put them in the basement. Or I'm going to send them to that house that I have over in the south of France because the Germans aren't there. So there were individuals who came up with their own decisions. And then there were groups of people who had their own decisions.
Well, I think this is so much of value as an example, and on top of what you said originally, what you just added, because it shows how we as individuals use critical thinking in our everyday lives.
Mhm.
And then we have blind spots where we're troubled or we're upset or insulted by things going on in our environment, either to us directly or to our country or within our country or between countries. And we've
Mhm.
got lots of that, probably all the time.
Yes.
And then it flares up more in our faces when the intensity, somehow when it's more in our faces, I think.
Well, I think it happens because of social media, and suddenly it's the most popular thing on social media to talk about this topic, this crisis of the moment.
Whatever. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you hear your friends talking about it and you start feeling guilty and what have you. So I think that's what happens is that
start feeling guilty. Start feeling guilty about what and how?
About what their friends are like making emotional statements on social media, or their celebrity that they love is making an emotional plea, or the government person that they love.
And so what's the guilt in the person who's
the guilt is I don't want to be the idiot who's not listening.
Right. Okay.
Right?
Okay. Right? I want to be in on it. Right.
Yeah,
right.
I want to be in on it. And I think, because it's so interesting to me how people, there's a crisis of the moment and it's blown out on the media one way or another. And suddenly we all have to be involved. We all have to give money to a charity. We all have to decide which line we stand on, the right or the left. And but what's funny to me is it's like, this didn't just start yesterday.
Right.
It's like you've decided to sensationalize it today, but this has been going on for a while now.
Right.
You think the people in the crisis that are part of this crisis, that they just found out about it yesterday? Right. This has been a long-standing thing, and that's where people who have critical thinking look at the situation and evaluate it, and they ask themselves, why is this happening? What is the point? What is the reason why this leader decided to do this? What is the reason why in our country, our leaders decided to come on board and make a decision about this? You got to look at the bigger picture. You can't just listen to what is being said by Walter Cronkite, for example.
Right.
And I'm just using him because he's dead.
Yeah.
And we agreed not to use current people. You're listening, you're hearing this person, but you're stepping outside of the box and asking more questions. You're not just jumping to conclusions like the mayor did and said, oh, well, they're taking the Jewish people to Paris and putting them in apartments. You're not just doing that. You're thinking for yourself.
It's like, I want to stay as we agreed. Thinking about how, I'm just going to say, the difference between journalism when I learned about it in junior high and even I had a writing coach with my book, and she talked about how learning to be a writer years ago came from where you worked. There were no writing courses. There were salons and you could write with groups, but you learned by working for a newspaper. That's where authors cut their teeth in writing skills. And I felt fortunate that I had one of those remaining writing coaches because they, got old and it's not done that way anymore. And the idea of bringing news as it's perceived. And then you have news networks and other mitigating factors, because those are businesses and need to make money. And I mean, even going back to when we were kids, I mean, headlines, sensational headlines are what made the news. And
you'd look at those headlines and you'd say, oh my God, look what's happening in the city. That's terrible. And you would just believe whatever you saw. You wouldn't call somebody in that neighborhood and say, what's going on?
So, and I guess I'm going to bring it up anyway, that this morning I was thinking, I guess maybe intuitively, about our conversation, and I'm thinking, the what's going on in our world right now that we're witnessing with I mean, the players are Ukraine and Russia, but the whole world are players. But what I was thinking this morning is, this is like, I hate to make it so simple, but how is it okay? Oh, I'm going to take your toys. We're having a play date. We live next door to each other. But you know what? I'm taking your blanket.
Right.
I'm going to take your pillow.
Right.
And there's no mommy or daddy around to say, oh no, I'm sorry. That belongs to Johnny. That's not yours. You have pillows in your house. And I'm thinking, what is the matter with me that I'm seeing it this way? But it's like, I don't know. I think that's critical thinking. Of course, I have nobody wants to hear that view of what's happening.
Right. Because, it's like, yes, Ellen, but.
Yeah, but they're killing people. People are dying. People are dying,
Right. Yeah. You're infantilizing this when there's such
a
much bigger situation. There's more important things at stake. And if you're on the Russian side, you're going to feel a certain way about it. And if you're on the Ukraine side, you're going to have another way of looking at it. And if you're a historian, you're going to look at it in a certain way. I've listened to so many arguments about why someone is right in that country. And I'm speaking of any country.
Right.
So I've listened to people talking about different wars in different countries. And if you listen to one side, they will give you this strong argument. Well, we had a right to go into that country and to take over. And then you listen to the other side of the person who lived there. Well, we had a right to defend our country because it's our country. We were here first. So you hear these different opinions.
I mean, it's like two kids in a car fighting over a seat.
I know.
I got here first.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like, isn't there another way of looking at this? Or like what we said in the beginning, how about if we come to the table and we sit down and we talk about what each of us wants to bring to this conversation and what strengths we have in common and what are we looking for and how can we work together as a team so that we can both share. To your point about toys and what have you, how can we make this work? And so here's the interesting thing. I'm going to choose a non-politically motivated topic. As I was telling you the other day, I went to a Hungarian gathering locally, and they were showing a video of Hungarian history. And as I think I mentioned, I think it was you, I was mentioning it too. The video started with talking about the pagans who were on the property and they had been living there for generations. And then the Magyars came in, the different Hungarian groups, and decided to take over the country. I mean, to take over the property, right? And but the way it was described on the video was the pagans were these evil people, that they would dare to fight for their country. They would dare to fight for this land that they've been living on for hundreds of years, right? But it's like, no, we're coming in. This is our property now, and we're going to annihilate you and take you over, and then talk nasty about you the rest of the centuries that come after this. And it was just so very interesting to me, because as a critical thinker, I went up and I spoke to the person who showed the video afterwards, and I said, didn't you think that was weird that they were talking about the pagans as these evil people? And that they were just, like the Native Americans.
I was just thinking that
Columbus came over. Yeah, this is our property, and now you're coming over here raping our wives and telling us no, it's not. No, I'm going to put the Italian flag here, or sorry, he was Spanish, wasn't he? Okay, well, one of those flags. No. A blonde moment there. Sorry. But so that's what we're trying to say about critical thinking, that you have to look at the broader context. When you're seeing something, you can't just look at it and say, oh, okay, if that's what you say. And because I come from this culture, I'm going to agree with this video and say pagans are bad. How dare they try to keep the Magyars out of the property that they were on, even though they were there first and they lived there and they lived off the land. And I mean, it's like, so.
It's like, hey, you're a bully. Are you trying to say you would like to live here with us? I mean, it's like,
I mean, imagine if they would have, of course, that was a time period when there was illiteracy. There wasn't colleges to go to, you just kind of, it was all a live for yourself kind of time period. Fight, you just do what seems right. If you have more power, then you have a right to go in there and just, it's mine now.
Well, it's a little bit like human development, I think. Till we learn how to be something called civilized, if that's a thing. Mm-hmm. And sometimes as far along as I'd like to think we are as a civilization, doesn't look it that much, because
no,
women are still fighting. Indigenous people are still under the thumb. Look what's happening with people from other cultures coming to America. Some have, some individuals within those cultures have been successful in overcoming discrimination. Some have felt welcome, some have felt unwelcome, some have felt just grateful to be out of the treacherous places they were in. I see us all of equal value. We all have different strengths and weaknesses and talents, but in terms of intrinsic value, to think that children are your property, that your own children are your property, is you have jurisdiction and you have responsibility, but do you own them? And there are many parents who feel that way. And certainly anywhere people enslave anybody, even
human trafficking.
Yeah, and and slavery throughout the world. I so value the stories of I'm just thinking during the Civil War, the people who did escape slavery, and their stories about their lives and what they were able to do with their lives, and struggled ongoing. And then all the immigrants that came after World War II who were able to come into this country and still coming. You know, it's all questionable. And I think it's important that anything that gives you an uh-oh feeling needs to be questioned. And then I love questioning myself, like, what's going on that I don't have an uh-oh feeling about, that I'm taking for granted?
Yeah.
You know, just to raise my awareness of it, like, what am I leaving out? What am I not looking at that I could have critical thinking about, and perhaps hopefully make some kind of contribution to the greater good further out of that.
Yeah. So. And so we also were talking about when it comes to critical thinking, we first said not having critical thinking, but a lot of the times people don't want to engage in critical thought because they're afraid it will get them into trouble.
Now, how, what are some examples of that?
Well, okay, as you asked. Well, when I was working for the government, Miss ESTJ on the Myers-Briggs, and using my critical thinking skills all the time and always getting into trouble in government because you're not supposed to think. But a lot of times I would go to people and I would say to them,
wait, don't lose that thought. You're not supposed to think in favor of, we need you to do these things, and you're supposed to follow along and do these things.
Right, even if it's unethical.
Right, even if you have questions about it, it's ethics and things like that. And that's also in lots of corporations, hospitals, if you're an employee, and systems, bureaucratic systems.
Military.
Yeah, okay, go ahead. Thank you for that.
So I would go and I'd talk to a colleague in government, and so many times I would hear things like, well, I don't want to get fired, or I don't want to lose my retirement benefits. That was the popular myth, that they were going to lose their retirement benefits. I mean, every single person who had gotten fired did not lose their retirement benefits. I mean, that was money that they had put aside. And if they were already vested, I think that was an automatic. If they weren't vested, then they obviously wouldn't get the funds that they didn't invest. But if you invested your own money, nobody's taking your own money away from you. But people would be afraid of that. But in going back to World War II, a lot of times, you know, when you've got a gun pointed at your head and you're choosing, should I choose my family or the neighbors who are Jewish? Right? You're not going to have critical thinking in that kind of a situation. So that's obvious. And so many people now like to say, well, if I had been back there, I would have done this. And it's like, really? Because you've been to a war zone and you've had a chance to employ those decisions, that decision-making skills. I don't think anybody could say what they would have done during the Holocaust unless they've actually maybe been a soldier in the military, in a war zone, in theater, or been somebody who's displaced from a war-torn country and can tell you about that. Growing up in a Hungarian household like I did, constantly hearing about what it was like to live under the rule of communism, and or the threat of communism, because my stepfather left in 1956 and got away. But talking to people who came after that, between 56 and 89, and came after that, or watching movies about it, those people, when they were living in communist countries under the Iron Curtain, or behind the Iron Curtain, excuse me, they had to be very careful how they had critical thinking skills, They had to go to church underground. They had to discern, is this neighbor safe enough to share my thoughts with? Because they may have been safe 2 days ago, but in the last 2 days, they've suddenly been threatened in some way. And now they are, or maybe they've been offered money to turn people in. And so now you don't know that. So you have to check, you have to question these things every single day. Can I trust this person? What's going to happen if I tell them this or that? So that's, what I learned, even though I wasn't taught critical thinking skills, because I am a thinker, I was listening the whole time to what I was being taught growing up, and then determining for myself, that doesn't seem right. I wonder why they did that. And even just like reading, even not taking a critical thinking class, but reading the Diary of Anne Frank as a little child, and you're so deeply moved by what you're reading, and your fight or flight is like, well, why didn't she go on the roof when the Nazis came? Like, she used to hang out with her buddy, the boy, they go on the roof. How come they didn't just run up there when they, that was what was going through my head, because when I got to that part in the diary, I was trying to think, how come they didn't do this? How come they didn't do that? So that's how my critical thinking skills were formed. But that's also, I was kind of dealing with 2 topics there, but that's also why people, that's the consequences that cause people to fear critical thinking.
I think you're bringing up another good point, is that even if we're not acting in a critical thinking way, that on the inside, many of us, or most of us, are thinking something's wrong here.
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with this situation? Or why is it, or why isn't this happening? Just like you said, even as little kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if there are any parents watching this, that to know that your child is thinking on their feet on the inside of themselves. And if there's anything you can do to make safe space for the little child just to share, try not to jump on the things that they might share with you, because then you're opening a line of communication that will help the child, as time goes on, access your critical thinking. And perhaps you could teach your child ways to recognize the value of what's coming to them, and to be able to think about it in ways that bring out their own talents and abilities and creativity. I love what you said, Jeannine.
Thank you. Which part did you love?
Well, the part about that you could see that you were questioning inside,
Mm-hmm.
and that you could see things going on, that I think children may look like they have a short attention span on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
but I take the position that nothing escapes a child.
No. Yeah, you have to be very careful with children, especially when they're getting communication skills. But even before that, because I can remember getting a bath in the sink when I was an infant.
Wow.
That's my earliest memory. But I also remember sitting on the floor as a toddler and listening to my mom talking about my father's infidelity. And
as a toddler,
yeah, as a toddler, because I was sitting on the floor looking up at her while she was washing dishes. Mm-hmm. And so, and I know where we were at, and she was married, and she didn't get a divorce from my birth father until I was 4. So obviously, if she's telling me about his infidelity, she's still married.
You were younger. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was younger. But I remember her talking to me about him, and I was making a decision from a little child's perspective about what I would do to handle the situation at that young age. And I told my mother, I remember distinctly what I said. I said, well, when I grow up, I'm going to let my husband have a girlfriend, and or something along those lines. I can't remember. I probably didn't say girlfriend, but I said something along those lines. And that was me thinking, like, wanting to make happiness, wanting to create some peace. Obviously, what she was telling me was causing her to cry and to be very disappointed and upset. And so I was trying to comfort her by saying, well, this is what I would do.
Yeah, and you'd feel a lot better if you just accepted it, Mom.
Yeah, just accept it. Just let him have a girlfriend, because then everything would be happy.
Be fine, right?
Peace, right?
Right.
Luckily, that wasn't one of the moments where she slapped me across the face.
Well, and and after a while, you get that a couple of times, you don't share anymore, right?
Like the backhand over the car seat. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, those were the reasons why I learned at an early age to curb my enthusiasm and to only speak to people that agreed with me. And when we were in the bedroom talking with my girlfriend and sharing what somebody told me or what parents told me, it wasn't until I became an adult that it was like, wait a minute, I can say what I want to say. And this is how I feel about it.
Right. There's so many things in what you said. Oh my God. I just want to say that children, and also for your parents who are watching this, that children have, there used to be a phrase, from the mouth of babes,
Yes.
which meant the truth from the mouth of babes. And children have beginner's mind. And I have always felt that children have wisdom, and that we as adults, feel pressed, we're the ones in charge, and, how can a little one know more than we do, and all this. Nevertheless, a child can be a great teacher to a parent if the parent is open and using critical thinking about their own approach to life, and that a child brings a fresh perspective. And this is going to sound like going down a tangent, but it's not, because the little girl that you were who said that, for all the reasons that you may have said it, there's communities of polyamorous couples, and that's not bigotry. It's called non-monogamous relationships by agreement. And your mother might not have been one to agree to that. Your father or stepfather might have been a person who would have been good in a community like that, where it's all by agreement. But in those days, in those cultures, not likely. You make an agreement to be married and that's it. Mm-hmm. And so, and then all the, other feelings that people experience, betrayal and, all that stuff. And then your mother handled it in the way that, she could handle it. Mm-hmm. But I just want to highlight the wisdom of the child, mm-hmm. that said, when I grow up, I would do this. Mm-hmm. Because once I was with my mother, we were in a car somewhere, and there were some of her girlfriends in the car. We were on our way somewhere. I was the only younger person. And later, my mother shared with me that one of the other women had a situation like that and overlooked it with her husband in order to retain the marriage. Because in that case, she loved him so much, and she used critical thinking to make a decision. Mm-hmm. And perhaps she felt that it was not an affront to her.
And that's what was right for her.
And that's what was right for her. That's one point.
I'm just wanting to point out that what we're talking about right now, we're kind of philosophizing and discussing certain scenarios, but neither of us are saying that's not our value system. That's right. Not, that's not what we would do. We're just saying this is an example. And that's taking that critical thinking. I'm explaining to the audience right now that this is what critical thinking is. Somebody's explaining something and you think about it, you don't suddenly assume that that's that person's opinion just because Ellen just brought these different scenarios up. You ask, is that your opinion? Is that how you would handle it in your marriage? But you don't just assume.
Right. And I'm big on looking at lots of examples.
Yes.
Just like I would encourage anyone and myself to vet out all the different resources that are relevant in what I'm focused on.
Yeah.
And then if you're in a position where you have to choose one, well, then you've made like it's called an educated decision.
Yeah. And so we're kind of we're a little over the hour now, but I wanted to kind of end by talking about propaganda, not conspiracy theories, but propaganda. And again, looking at history and the media and how they've used journalism, leaflets, flyers to get people to believe certain things. And when I was researching my book, The Uprisers, which is about the 1956 revolution in Hungary, I was learning that about anti-Semitism because, to learn about one revolution, you kind of have to know what preceded it and what the bigger picture was. And so it was talking about anti-Semitism in one of the resources I was reading. And it was mentioning that there was a time early on, probably the 1910s or something, when, whenever we had planes, so they would be flying over the villages and dropping leaflets, just dropping these flyers on the village. And these flyers would say things about anti-Semitism. And it would be educating these uneducated people in the village, farmers, fishermen, laborers, telling them, here's the way, here's what's happening, here's what the Jewish people are doing, and this is how you should think. Just like religions have done with Wicca and paganism, painting photographs and indoctrinating their masses with negative information about them so that people would think negatively about them. So it's like, my point in bringing that up is, as a social worker, I saw firsthand how the media would make up stuff about my children, who were my clients on my caseload, when they did something they shouldn't have done. In particular, I had a young girl who slashed somebody's throat in the early 2000s. And the media went on a rampage about talking about how she was in a gang, and this was a gang initiation. Well, being a social worker, as you know, Ellen, we're bound by confidentiality. We are not the ones who get to call the newspaper up and say, no, that's not what happened. My client was a schizophrenic and she's not involved in a gang. You can't do that. You have to allow the government to, bring out the press release or the public relations person and let them make the decision as to what is going to be announced. So I learned that's just one incident, but there was lots of incidents where my clients were being misrepresented in the media. Lies, like blatant lies, were being told about them because in criminal situations, because they could not call me up on the phone and say, Jeannine, can you tell me what such and such did last night when they slit the throat open? Why did they do that? They couldn't do that. They weren't allowed to do that. So they just made stuff up. And I know countless stories about that where they just did that. They had absolutely no information whatsoever. They just created it, just like the mayor in the French Village where he said the Jews are being taken to apartments in Paris. And that's what we have. That's why we have to end in. Everybody needs to look at the bigger picture. You have to have critical thinking skills. You can't just go by what the newspaper says, what your best friend said on social media. I mean, for God's sakes, Facebook is definitely not the truth. It's stuff, that's a meme. It's a image. It's something, half the time quotes that you see on there, I look them up and they aren't even true. It didn't have anything, the person never said it. So, I mean, it's like you've got to research things. You've got to look at the bigger picture. You've got to look into history, employ critical thought.
Scratch the surface to like get under and see what else there is.
Wash
right?
dirty windows.
Wash dirty windows and with a clean rag.
Yes.
Right?
So what's in the car? Exactly.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
and I'll tell you, there's another tool I use when I feel like I'm involved in opposing views, because I can get engaged in that. If somebody, I had a situation where I said to somebody on the phone, I said, wait a minute, I don't know about that. I said, what are we doing now? She says, well, we're having a debate. I said, oh, I didn't know I was going to be in a debate. So I said, why don't you just tell me your view? And if I feel myself not liking the view, and I'm questioning my resistance, because I could have a resistance that comes up that's a little blinding. So I always say to myself, what if there's a kernel of truth in what the other person is saying? So that's another part of my, not wanting to believe everything I read, and it doesn't matter where the news is coming from. It's good to think critically about it. Mm-hmm. And I could have in the back of my mind, well, what if this is true? What if? Not so much, I know it is or I know it isn't. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say to you, I know we didn't want to, but I mean, conspiracy theories, it's like, what's that? Who's behind it? Yeah. What's it useful for? Just raise the questions about it. Mm-hmm. And very often what it looks like at the beginning of your analysis is different than what it looks like at the end. And you might still make the same decision, but at least it's an educated decision. Exactly.
And sometimes I think conspiracy theories have turned out to be true, but I don't know. I mean, it's like, let's do some research on it before we just make that decision.
Yeah, or why would somebody think that? And where is the origin of that thinking?
Exactly. Yeah, you and I have had that conversation quite a few times.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it's like just a simple one, the 5G thing. I mean, it's like, let's don't take Verizon's word for it, because Don't you think that they're obviously going to say something positive about it?
I mean, that's the other thing. Another great question to ask. Somebody points out, like, okay, well, who would benefit from this? From many people believing this is true. Yeah. And you don't have to take it further than that. You could, listen, you could think it up. Mm-hmm. What kinds of companies, what comprises that, and okay, it just gives you just are much more informed. And sometimes when your awareness expands, other questions and even creative new solutions can come to you that then maybe you could share with people. I don't know.
But, right, exactly. What frustrates me the most, though, and I'm not going to bring up what we discussed, but because it's way too controversial to discuss. But what bugs me is when people want to talk about a group of people. Remember, we had that discussion? They want to talk about a group of people that they have never met, They've never been in the group, but they know all these things about the group and they know why it's wrong.
Or that it's wrong.
And
Or
that
that
it's wrong.
something's wrong,
It
right?
is wrong.
Right.
And then they get on YouTube, or they write these articles or what have you, and they just demolish this group by saying bad, 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 evil, 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 and here's the reason why. But I look at that, as I was telling you the other day, because since I, in this particular discussion we were having, I had people, family members who were in that group and friends, and I was saying, well, I know for a fact that because they have never, what they're saying, it's obvious they've never once been in that group and they have no clue what they're talking about. And that's not okay. It's not okay with me for people to just grandstand and make these decisions about things that they've never even been a part of.
I remember, it could have been in elementary school. I don't know why this stuck in my head. Stereotyping. Just keep questioning yourself. If you notice that you're really stuck in a position, well, am I stereotyping? And also to stay away from words like always or never, because there's much more variety in human beings than all one way and all the other.
Yeah.
And so with that, any parting words?
I think we do need to come to an end.
Yes. Anything else? Any parting words? Any way to?
Well, let me end with another quote. How does that sound?
Great.
All right. I think I will end with Dr. Viktor Frankl. He was a psychologist, and as I said in the beginning, he survived Auschwitz, and then went on to write many, many books that are translated all over the world. And so he says, everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So I wanted to leave with that because, again, as I said, he survived Auschwitz. And that quote is based on his realization about emotional intelligence, not blaming people. He never blamed people. He just simply observed what he saw as a psychologist while he was in a concentration camp. And I think he may have been in more than one, but he just simply observed. When he survived, he wrote books about it. And that's what he said. That's what he saw. That's the gist of it. Critical thinking.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's beautiful. And I guess we should end there.
Okay.
There's many things that we discussed today that we're going to come back
I'm exhausted.
and talk some more.
We are sub YouTube videos, sub categories.
Thank you. This has been wonderful and participate in, and we hope you have enjoyed it. And if you have, please send your friends and relatives to view our videos, just enlightening conversations. So.
And subscribe to our videos so you can hear more conversations that we will have in the future. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. It's been
our mine, yes.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.